Good day and welcome to this demonstration of BDO Lead. My name is Aletta Boshoff and I'm an advisory partner at BDO in Australia, and I'm also the national leader for IFRS and corporate reporting. Now, we are very excited to be able to provide BDO Lead, our IFRS 16 technology solution, to our clients. BDO Lead is being provided as software as a service, and we would like to show you some of the functionalities in this short demonstration. Before I look at the demonstration, I want to highlight the three key reasons that BDO Lead is an amazing product. And this is based on feedback that we've received from our existing clients. Now, first of all, BDO Lead deals with all the aspects and all the requirements of IFRS 16. There's no need to do any calculations outside BDO Lead. So BDO Lead is fully compliant with IFRS 16, no workarounds. Second benefit is we have an ability to create a true up journal in BDO Lead. So if the finance team have processed journal entries based on what they believe to be the correct information, and a number of months later, they realize that the property team or the commercial team have entered into different arrangements, and there was a little bit of a slow flow of information to the finance team, we can put all that updated information in BDO Lead with the appropriate effective date, and BDO Lead will calculate a true up journal entry. And that is extremely powerful, especially if you have hundreds of thousands of leases. And then the third benefit is that BDO Lead comes with a help desk. And that help desk is not only an IT or technology help desk, but actually an IFRS help desk. So the IFRS experts will answer the phone or respond to your emails in the first instance. Based on our experience since 2017, I would say 99.9999% of all calls that come to the help desk are actually IFRS 16 related and not related to the technology. So that's the three key benefits of using BDO Lead software as a service. I'll now go on. I'll share my screen, and then we can look at the functionalities of BDO Lead. Now here you can see the initial screen. On the left-hand side, we've got 4 sections: contracts, that has information, all our lease agreements in. We've got reports, we've got base data and settings. Now on the left-hand side, those drop-down menus really manage what we do in BDO Lead. Then on the right-hand side, at the bottom, you'll see there's a button that's now circled in blue, which is new. And all the actions appear on the right-hand side at the bottom. So you look at the left-hand side for the drop-down menus and on the right-hand side for the actions. So very easy to use. If you look at these 4 categories on the left-hand side, the base data and the settings you only deal with once, and that's initially when you set up your information in BDO Lead, and often our team would do that because we are responsible for the deployment of BDO Lead and the initial upload of all your lease agreements. To give you a very quick overview, if you look at settings, under users, we set up all the companies, we set up the users. We've got 3 levels of users, so your users could be set up as admin or read only, or being able to make changes. The other important one that I want to flag is history, and history provides a full audit trail. So you can see there who's made any changes to any lease in the company, when they've made the change, exactly what they've changed. So under settings, users powerful, and history, the audit trail, extremely powerful. The base data, again, we set up front, so you can create and set up all the companies using the base data. So you have your base company, the name, the company code, etc. You can set up your partner information. You can set up currencies. All the base data that you set up here will allow this information to appear in the drop-down menu when you upload new contracts. You can put in your management units, and you can put in the various asset classes. Now, the asset classes usually line up with the asset classes in your financial statements, whether it's property, vehicles, etc. So base data, the initial data that we set up before we start to upload all your contracts. On an ongoing basis, you won't deal much with base data and settings. So let's look at the contracts. When you look at contracts, there's a section on all the contracts. There are templates. There's import and export of contracts and multiple data processing. Now, I'll start by looking at the contracts. So if you look at the contracts, all the contracts appear. I want to look at this particular lease number 8, and show you how we manually upload lease information into BDO Lead. Obviously, normally our clients will upload their lease portfolio using an automatic upload or a press at the button upload from Excel. But I want to show you manually how you do it, and then the Excel functionality supports this on a greater scale. So if you look at the top, we've got different tabs for common data, more options, leasing periods, assets, the calculation, comments tab, and then printable version. So if you look at common data, now this is initially where you put up stuff like the name of the lease. It could be just property lease number 2. It could be the address if you so wish. You'll see the system will immediately know that this is the first time recognition of this particular lease. When you look at contract type, you can distinguish between lessee or lessor, and usually it's a lessee. You'll see you can also put in the currency of this particular lease, and there's a drop down based on the base data that we've set up. If you look at the company, various companies, again, there's a drop down for all the companies we've set up. This particular lease is sitting in Demo Company 1. On the right-hand side, when you look at the partner, you could, from the drop-down menu, pick up the lessor name. And that's often when you have very similar lessors across your portfolio. Otherwise, you can put in a new partner and put the lessor details in, but it's also not necessary to put it in if you don't want to put it in. The contract start date will be processed, so that this one is the 1st of January 2020. You can use the calendar function to do that. We wouldn't put in the date of conclusion because that really depends on whether you'll be using extension options or not. So the system will calculate that. If you want to capture other information related to dates, potentially the date that you've signed a lease agreement, you can potentially put it in here, the date of effective start. You can, if you want to put in a contract name or a reference number, you can add it in this box as well. It's important to know that not every box that you see on the screen is mandatory. There are certain minimum information that's required, but you don't have to complete each and every box. Is this an internal contract? So it's internal within the group. You can tick that if that's the case. If this is a sublease, you can put it in. And then if this is a limited contract, which usually a lease would be, and that will impact the depreciation period, you will tick that on. If you look at the accounting standards you want to activate, if it's IFRS 16 and you're a lessee, it can only ever be a finance lease. If you use US GAAP, you have to decide whether this lease is a finance lease or an operating lease. The bottom part of this screen is very important, especially if you want to integrate the information from BDO Lead into your accounting system. So you can put in information around the legal entity, profit center. You can, from the drop-down menu, pick up the management unit. You can add in the cost center. So we actually have 6 levels of information that we can put into BDO Lead in order to for you to facilitate creating journal entries that line up to different cost centers, etc. If we go on to more options, this is where we start to do the completeness test of IFRS 16. So IFRS 16, all the information we need to be able to do the calculation now and in future, we capture. So we look at the lease agreement once, we capture everything. So question is this maybe a low value asset that's subject to this lease? Or is it a short-term lease? Why is that important? Because if you click that, the information will be captured in the lease register, but it will not flow through to the calculation of your lease liability and right of use asset. Is there transfer of ownership? Again, that would impact depreciation. Is there an implicit interest rate in the agreement? You'll put it in. Or if there's not, what is the borrowing rate, incremental borrowing rate? I just want to be very clear that we do not calculate an incremental borrowing rate in BDO Lead, and this incremental borrowing rate has to be provided by the organization. There's a question of, is there a residual value? If the residual value is 0, the payment date is grayed out. If we change this residual value to, let's say, 1,000, now you also have to put in a payment date. And you can see the red box that appear there. It's a flag that this particular screen, not all the information has been provided, so you cannot process this lease. If we go back and we make this 0, everything is being completed. Is there a purchase option? If there is a purchase option, you can say we want to add a purchase option, and it asks for all the information required to do the calculation, the value, the payment date, and whether we're reasonably certain that we'll exercise this or not. So you capture absolutely all the information. The next tab is the important one. This is where you have to be extremely careful to capture all the right information. Looking at this screen, we can immediately see that there's an initial leasing period from the 1st of January 2020 to 31 December 2024. Then there's an extension period for another 3 years and another extension period for another 3 years. The other thing that we can see immediately, the lease period obviously will be included in the calculation. This contract expansion period with the little ticks, the little tick in the little box here indicates that we have said to the system that we are reasonably certain to use this extension option, and therefore everything will be included in the calculation. This one, we've captured the extension period, but at this stage, it's not included in the calculations because we haven't indicated that it's part of the, that we're reasonably certain to use it. So what do we calculate for each period? If you look at the first one, you have your start date and your end date of your initial period that you capture. Is there a termination option? And if there is, you will enable the termination option. And again, some information will be asked to make sure we capture everything. And, you know, do we think, so is this termination option executed or not? Again, we capture everything. And then payment rules, very important. So this is the exact date that we make the payment. So in this instance, we've said it's paid in advance from the 1st of January 2020, which is also the commencement date of the lease. It ends at the end of 2024. We are paying monthly. We're paying $1,000 per month, and scaling. It's scaling up every 12 months by 4%. So this is a fixed increase in the agreement. And therefore we capture it in the scaling, and it will be included in the net present value. If you click on the little pencil throughout BDO Lead, it gives you the ability to amend or adjust. So it could be that we say, listen, this one don't scale over time. Instead, it should be index-based. So that's maybe a CPI adjustment. CPI adjustment, we don't know what CPI is going to be. We flag that this lease is subject to a CPI adjustment. We don't know what it is. We have to wait for the numbers to become available. So we just capture that. So you can see we capture for this leasing period all the details about the payments. If you look at the extension period, similar information, but there's one extra block. Will this extension period be executed, yes or no? At the moment, it's ticked as yes. And the last one, we've said no, it exists in the original lease agreement, but we don't think we'll execute it. You can also add more leasing periods. So that's a possibility. You just add new leasing period and it will be added. Go to assets. If you go to the assets tab, again, a completeness exercise. Do we have any payments for contract initiation? What's the amount? At what date are we paying it? Other initial costs, government grants, lease incentives that we've received, and restoration costs. So all the items that could impact the right of use asset, we ask the question, we capture the information here. So if there are make good provisions at the end of the lease, we have to capture that here as well. If there are any additional payments, we have to capture that. So we want to make sure we ask all the questions. And then if you look at the assets, we can say exactly what the name of the asset is. This lease is absolutely 100% for one particular asset. And again, you can amend it. If you so wish, you can put in a description, maybe an address. So a lot of detail we can capture. At the bottom of the screen is a fairly new development, I think about 6 months old, where we've added pre-history of contracts. So we have the ability to transition from other providers or Excel to BDO Lead very seamlessly, because we will ask you on the date that you transition or your last audited numbers, what was the original cost of this right of use asset? On the date of transition, what was the accumulated depreciation? We need that information for future purposes, so let's capture it here. We don't have to recalculate it, we capture it and we move forward. So that's another great functionality in BDO Lead. So transitioning from other systems or Excel to BDO Lead is very easy using that functionality. So you'll see those first 4 tabs ask all the questions, all the information we need. If you want to see calculations for this one lease, you can look at the calculation tab. You can put in start date, end date. You can ask for interest, expense, depreciation. You can ask for numbers at a particular date, so the right of use asset balance, the lease liability, etc. So the calculation quite powerful, but only for one particular lease. I'll show you how that happens across all the leases. That's the real beauty. If you look at the comments, you can put comments in here, things you want to remember, assumptions you've made, judgments you've applied. And the other thing is, if you want to put in a link to where you've saved your actual PDF of your lease agreements, you can put it in here. So you can put in a link to SharePoint where the actual PDF files are saved as example. And then printable is the last one to create a printing of all the information. If we go to, still staying with this contract, if you're happy with all the information included in the contract, and one person that's maybe put it in, it's important to save it. But the other thing is, if a second person looks at it and they're happy with this information, they'll click this green button and they say, we now validate this lease. We accept this lease, that the information has been captured correctly. Important now is, if we now want to make a change to this lease, we have to press this button, edit contract. So you can't just make changes. The lease has been saved, it's been validated. If we now want to make a change, you click edit contract and it now asks you, based on the definitions in IFRS 16, do you want to create a reassessment? So that would be a CPI adjustment, for example, or if you want to change your assessment on whether you want to use an extension option or not. Or do you want to create a modification? So that's where you've actually renegotiated certain aspects of the lease agreement, and now you have to update BDO Lead with those changes, or it could be an error that's happened. You become aware of an error and you edit the current revision. This will be logged in our audit trail, and we know who's done the reassessment, the modification, etc. If we just look at a reassessment, you would put in at what date are you making this reassessment. So if we say, and remember this is this true-up functionality, although we are sitting here in November 2023, we might potentially say that we want to put in a reassessment for 30 June 2022, and we want to create that reassessment. And there it is. So it's opened up the lease, and we can now process the changes we want to make. So for example, we go to leasing periods. Maybe we say that contract extension period will no longer be executed. We'll save that. We can check it. Somebody else can check it, and we validate it again. So we validate that change. The interesting thing is when you do your calculations and you want to know what was the original information, you can click here on show older version, and you can see, although we have a reassessment, which we've just processed, we can go back to the initial one to just see what it looked like, just to remember what the information was, and you can go back to your revision number 1. So all the versions and the different states are kept in the database, and it can be revisited. The other thing to look at is if we look at templates, you can set up templates to upload information, and that is where you've got a lot of similar lease agreements, similar start dates, end dates, and it will make it easier. The third one is the one that we use most often, and that is the import or export of contracts in bulk. So the bulk uploading. So in the initial import of contracts, you'll start off by saying, download our initial template. It will download a template in Excel with instructions, and you'll put all your lease information in that Excel document. And then you'll import your new contracts using that Excel document, using this button, import new contracts. So that is to import a lot of agreements or information from lease agreements at the same time. You can export existing contracts. So for a particular company, let's say Demo Company 3, you can export all pending leases, maybe all validated leases or all completed leases, and you can put in a period. So you can export your leases, and you've got all of that in Excel then. The reasons we would export our leases is twofold. You could export the leases in order to have a lease register at a particular date that you want to give to your auditors so they can select a sample. Or you could say to BDO Lead, we want to make modifications to the information. We want to reassess a lot of leases. We want to do it in bulk. So you would tell BDO Lead that I'm exporting all these leases into Excel, and that you can expect to receive it back. So it's going to come back, changed. So you can export all your leases as well for lease register purposes. And then at the bottom, if we want to import in edited contracts, we use this functionality. So this screen and this part of BDO Lead is all dealing with bulk upload or bulk export of information in order to make changes in Excel fairly easily. The multi-data processing tab is where we make a copy of a whole company with all the lease information at a particular date. We save it under a new name, for example, in order to create a budget for the next year. So we make a copy, we give it a new name, budget, let's say 2025, and then we put in proxy leases, CPI adjustments, all the things that we're not allowed to do under IFRS 16, but we can do it for budget purposes to get a more accurate expectation of cash flow and what the impact of P&L and balance sheet will be. So it's really, we're making a copy, I would say, for modeling purposes, budgeting purposes. So that's a functionality that we have. If we move on to reports, there are a large number of reports that's been developed over the years that are extremely useful. I want to flag a few of the key ones. So the first one is a contract series report. Now that report you run per lease, and a contract series report will give you all the information of a particular lease right from the start, right till the end of that particular lease. So if the auditors select a sample, we'll run a report for them on all the leases in their sample, and they can get a perfect overview of that particular lease. So initially, reassessments, modifications, everything. So that's useful. The contract list report, and this is the data you'll put in. For a contract list report, the focus is on the lease liability. So it's giving you opening balances, all the changes that happened, and the closing balance. It gives you the split between current and non-current liability at the date you run the report. The asset list report looks at the right of use assets, very similar to a fixed asset register, opening balance, depreciation, accumulated depreciation, all the changes. So again, powerful information. The notes report, again, is very powerful because the notes report will give you a report that you can use this information to put in your annual report to comply with all the disclosure requirements of IFRS 16. You pick your company, you pick your management units, you pick the period you want to run it for, and you get all your results. The report that we use most often on a regular basis is the Common Booking Entries report. So this particular report, you would say, will give you all the journal entries for each and every lease for the period that you've requested. So you can either request it for all companies, or you can select, let's say, Demo Company 3. You select its IFRS that you want to run it for. It's for all management units, or maybe just a particular management unit. I've said all management units. It's for all our valid contracts. It's for us being a lessee, and you put in your evaluation period. So the start date, so maybe it is 1 July 2020. Sorry, I have to put in, it's, let's say, July 2022 to June 2023, and you run your report. So all the reports, you've got your basic information, you select your company, you select your evaluation period, and you can run your report, and your results can be showed in Excel or in CSV. So this is a powerful report. And for that reason, for this demonstration, I've run this report, and I want to show you this report. And here it is. So this is a common booking entries report that's been run. If you look at this report, it gives you a good summary of a number of information, all the information that we've captured and that I've showed you to capture manually in BDO Lead. Everything is here across each and every lease. I just want to say the report doesn't prepare, or BDO Lead doesn't prepare this report with the colors that you see here. I've added the colors just for demonstration purposes, because these are the columns that are particularly important if you want to process your journal entries. I also want to say, you can see I've hidden certain columns. There's a lot of information in this report, but all the colors that I've highlighted, or the columns I've highlighted, are the actual journal entries that you would process. So column T would be your payments, the actual cash payments during the period. So usually when our clients make their lease payments, they say credit cash, debit the suspense account. And then after they've prepared this common booking entries report, they would say credit that suspense account. And you can see here column X, debit the interest share with these amounts, and debit the lease liability with these amounts in green. So these first three colors together will form a journal. So it's the payments, which we replace with interest share, and lease liability, or reduction of the lease liability. So you can see we credit the suspense account, we debit the interest expense, and we debit the lease liability. That's how those three work together. Column AF is the depreciation for the period. So debit depreciation, credit accumulated depreciation. Column AJ is whenever you've got a new lease on day one, there's a debit right of use asset and there's a credit lease liability. So this is the debit of the initial right of use asset, and column AN is the credit of the initial lease liability. Then you can see all these light green columns together, all of them together reflect a true up of the split between the current liability and the non-current liability. So what you'll see here, after every period when we run the common booking entries report, that split between current non-current liability have to be updated because it will always have to look at the next 12 months. So we don't just do this split at reporting date. It actually happens every time we process our journals. We true up that split. So these journals make that happen. These light pink journals all together are the various combinations of journals that you could get when you have a reassessment of a lease or modification of a lease. So sometimes you modify a lease and it increase your liability, or it could decrease the liability. It could increase the right of use asset, or it could decrease it as a result of the reassessment. And then for modifications, similar things can happen. The liability could increase or decrease as a result of a modification. And the same with the right of use asset. That right of use asset could increase or decrease. And if we've got a modification, there is also a profit and loss impact. And therefore you can see reassessments, no profit and loss impact, modifications, profit and loss impact. So all those pink journals together deal with reassessments and modifications. If you look at this light apricot journals, those are all the adjustments to the right of use asset. So this could be in column CP. It could be where we've had a decrease in an asset value, an impairment. We'll process that in BDO Lead and generate a journal. Or it could be that we fair value the right of use asset and we increase the right of use, the value of the right of use asset. Again, those journals would appear here. And then the light blue columns would reflect if we had a termination or an early termination of a lease. It will also deal with a situation where a lease has expired. Therefore, you have to remove your right of use asset. You have to remove your original cost of your right of use asset, your accumulated depreciation, and there will be no lease liability left if it's an expiry. If it's a termination, there will be a lease liability that have to be removed, and it will result in a P&L impact as well. So these columns up to column DS are all the journals that could eventuate as a result of a lease agreement or a change to a lease agreement or a value adjustment to a right of use asset, etc. Everything is captured in this one report, and it's captured on a per lease basis. So for each and every lease, you've got all those journals. Now, obviously, many of our clients would say we don't want to process it on a lease by lease basis. Some clients do, but some don't. Some want to process it, all the equipment leases together, for example, all the vehicle leases together, all the property leases together. So all we've got here is a combination of whatever you see in that Common Booking Entries Report, CBER, Common Booking Entries Report. That is just summarized in the journals from the Common Booking Entries Report. So if you've got all your equipment leases, there's a journal around depreciation, a journal around the lease payments, a journal around new leases during the period, a journal around that current non-current split. There's a journal around reassessments, modifications, if applicable. Here you see nothing because there were no reassessments, modifications of equipment leases during this period. If there were changes to the value, there's a separate journal, and there's a journal for termination. of leases or completion or expiry of leases. So that's just a summary of all the equipment leases from the report. And then you can also have that information for all property leases. You can have that information for all vehicle leases. You have that information for every asset class. So this is to give you an idea, the output from BDO Lead. Now, the output from BDO Lead could also be integrated with accounting packages, and that's an option, and we've done it for various clients. So just want to flag that that is also a possibility. I think that is enough from a demonstration perspective. Again, if you want further information, if you want a further demonstration of BDO Lead, please feel free to reach out to us at BDO in Australia. My name is Aletta Boshoff, and please contact me and you'll find all our contact details on the website. Thank you very much for joining us for this demonstration.